So Brandon Royval versus Manel Kape, the final UFC card of the year, wrapped up just yesterday. And well, you saw what Manel Kape did to Royval, right? A first round, titty-fueled, brutal KO against the guy who went to war with the current champion. And well, Manel Kape is a former RIZIN champion. Aren't RIZIN fighters really good? And did you know that Manel Kape got tapped out by Kyoji Horiguchi in RIZIN as well? Wow, Kyoji is really good too, isn't he? But now, let's take a step back and think. What are you gonna do? Seriously, it's mid-December right now. UFC 324 is on January 24th. There is a 6-week gap between Royval versus Kape and Gaethje versus Pimblett. Do you know what else happens in that time frame? Well, I'll tell you. In 6 weeks, a college student can learn enough knowledge to be ready to take a midterm or final exam on a subject. In 6 weeks, a fertilized human egg will have grown into an embryo that is around half an inch in length, with noticeable limbs and a heartbeat. And in 6 weeks, you can conquer France if you're the average MMA Instagram account's favorite painter/politician. So my point is, a lot can happen in 6 weeks. It's an awfully long time to go without watching any MMA. And I also know that it's an awfully long time for degenerate gambling addicts to go without betting on the sport. And if you're addicted to gambling, don't watch the rest of this video because I'm pretty sure that the cards I'm about to introduce to you have betting lines. And it's better if you're able to break that addiction during this 6-week UFC break. But anyways, in this video, I'd like to go over what you can watch instead of the UFC during this 6-week break. Because while having no UFC to watch during this time might suck for many of you, if you are an MMA fan, not a UFC fan, but a MMA fan, it is the perfect opportunity to branch out and watch something new. And while some of you may say like, but the UFC is the best promotion, everybody outside of the UFC is a bum. First, I know for a fact that you watched Gabriel Bonfim versus Randy Brown main event at the Apex. And I also know that you watched Hamdi Abdelwahab versus Chris Barnett pork around for 15 minutes. And second, as I will show you in a bit, many of these fighters are UFC level. And hell, in the case of certain fighters, they might even be championship level. I mean, we just saw what RIZIN fighters like Kyoji Horiguchi and Manel Kape have gone on to do in the UFC, and Yuri has gone on to be a champion as well. And since we're talking about RIZIN, let's get started talking about the RIZIN New Year's Eve event. Now of course, at this point, you would know my channel is defined in large part by RIZIN Glaze. Whether it be subtly dropping the name of the promotion in my longer videos, or just straight up making videos about the promotion from time to time, even though they get way worse views. But there's a reason why I glaze the promotion, and it's because it is straight up the best MMA product out there right now that is not the UFC. And while I can list a ton of different reasons about why it's great, from the music to the fighter entrances to even the goddamn poster art, the number one reason why it's worth watching is simply how different it is from the UFC. Let's just do a side-by-side comparison between the UFC and RIZIN. When it comes to the rule set, the UFC uses the unified rules of MMA, while RIZIN has its own special RIZIN rules that allow knees to the head of a grounded opponent, soccer kicks, and stomps to the face. Already, the rule set is different, and I think most would agree when I say better. The RIZIN rules make an MMA bout much closer to a street fight, as staying on the ground will literally get your face kicked in. Next, the fights take place in a ring. Now, this might be a downgrade from the cage, and in most cases, it is. It's basically impossible to wall walk, and sometimes the referees have to push fighters back into the ring. However, it also makes stalling by shoving opponents up to the edge of the ring much more difficult. And even when that happens, referees are much more likely to break up clinches. And third, the atmosphere is just different. As I think I've said before, if you watch a RIZIN card, you'll be able to hear every strike that is thrown, which is like the UFC Apex. But whenever a big moment like a knockdown or submission attempt happens, the crowd will cheer and scream and clap and go crazy. The Japanese crowd is simply built different. And if you don't believe me, here's King Piggy himself talking about it.
Pride, Japan, they're back. They haven't been there in so long. And I've always wanted to see that. Like, that's the one atmosphere I loved when watching like Asakura fights in Tokyo, is the atmosphere in the arena over there is just insane. So,
but anyways, let's talk about the actual card itself as well. This card is the RIZIN New Year's card, and it is going down on December 31st in Japan, or December 30th if you're in the States or the UK. Now, I'm scrolling through this event on Tapology, and do you notice anything about the fights? That's right. Featherweight, lightweight, bantamweight, flyweight, featherweight, bantamweight, lightweight. The heaviest weight class on this card is 155 pounds. And we all know that lighter man skill is absolutely a thing in MMA. And if you look at the fighters who are on the card, you'll see that many of them are actually really good. Hiromasa Ogikubo, who is fighting for the vacant flyweight championship in RIZIN, actually beat Pantoja, which is more than can be said of Joshua Van. And look, no hate towards Van, but facts are facts, okay? Jose Torres, who is fighting at the bantamweight on this card, beat Amir Albazi without much trouble back in Brave CF, and that Amir Albazi was Albazi without all of the catastrophic injuries that he has now. And the guy in the main event, Rajabali Shade Alive, is so good, so absolutely good, that I'm making a video about just him right now. I'm telling you, he is the next Yuri Prohaska. He is the next Manel Cape. He is the next Kyoji Horiguchi. He's 16-0, all wins by finish, and just KO'd a 26-4 Russian guy in 33 seconds in his last defense of the RIZIN featherweight title. I'll be going over this in depth in my video just about Rajabali, but he legitimately has the potential to become the next great UFC champion. Even as he is now, I would pick him to win against the vast majority of the UFC featherweight division, and he's only 25 years old. So yes, once Rajabali goes to the UFC and tears shit up, you'll be able to tell all of your casual friends, hey, I knew about this guy and was on the hype train from the very beginning. But anyways, I also end up getting asked this question quite often. How do you watch RIZIN? And well, that's a great question, and the answer has been in the upper left corner of this video for the past 3 minutes. You can watch it on RIZIN TV, which is RIZIN's own streaming service. And yeah, I know that many of you probably want an illegal streaming link, but like, come on, you don't have to fork over your hard-earned money to Dana White in this case. And it's a single pay-per-view event that is going to be $20. That's pretty reasonable, right? When you consider that it's a fourth of what the UFC pay-per-views were. $20 is the price of a Big Mac combo meal in California. So I'm sure you can use your Klarna to finance it. And yeah, you might say, well, it's too expensive, while simultaneously donating a month's rent to MMA Guru and MMA Joey. Just try buying it for this one event, and if you don't like RIZIN after watching it, just don't buy it again. But if you do like it, well then, you've just found an alternative to the UFC that you can look forward to. And the one final big upside I can think of when it comes to RIZIN is that the English language fanbase for RIZIN is very, very niche, so it ends up being much less toxic than the rest of the MMA fandom. As for when this card is happening, since it starts in Japan at 1 p.m. Japan time, that is 11 p.m. on December 30th at Eastern Standard Time, 4 a.m. London time, and 3 p.m. in Sydney and Melbourne. And look, that might be too early or too late for many of you, but it's also happening during winter break for most of you. So yeah, ruin your schedule a bit. I already know that many of you have terrible sleep schedules anyways. But if you want alternatives to the UFC that won't ruin your sleep schedule, well, then let's talk about KSW and OKTAGON. So I'll get started with KSW first, since they have their big event, KSW 113, Bartanitsky versus Tolshiev, literally 6 days from now. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I know very little about KSW. However, when you consider how the former KSW bantamweight champion Jakub Wiklax did against Patchy Mix, you'd kinda be left to think the champion level fighters at KSW might be better than the champs at PFL. Just might. But anyways, this card is pretty damn solid, having the welterweight and middleweight championship fights on there. In particular, the welterweight champion, Adrian Bartanitsky, looks pretty damn good as a fighter. Now 30 years old, 17-1, and that single loss is up a weight class at middleweight. He's also beaten Salhadin Parnassi, who is a lightweight that is extremely good, but didn't get poached by the UFC because KSW can afford to pay him more. His opponent, Muslim Tolshiev, is a Chechen fighting out of Germany who is 14-3. He is also pretty decent by the standards of non-UFC MMA. And remember, this is all MMA outside of the UFC. And while you might think that everybody is on steroids in the UFC, at the UFC, they have to at least keep up the appearance that athletes are natty. Outside of the UFC though, where organizations have less money to test athletes, you can count on many of their fighters being big, thick, and juicy. The card after KSW 113, KSW 114, is headlined by two heavyweights. And these guys aren't UFC heavyweights. They're not fat blobs. There's more juice in them than Rich Piana, and their piss probably melts steel beams. One half of the main event, Arkadiusz, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, is a 6'7" former Glory kickboxer who is 6-1 in MMA. He just got subbed by Tom Aspinall's training partner Phil DeFries in his last fight, but before that, he was on a 4-fight finishing streak, with 3 of those wins being sub 1 minute KOs. And all of these fights can be viewed through the KSW website where they have their own pay-per-view system, alright? Now, moving on to the last big event I want to talk about, it has to be the OKTAGON card on December 28th. This show is going to be a bit smaller than the RIZIN show, but it's still going to take place in front of a huge crowd in Prague, with an attendance of 20,000 or more. The main event is going to be between Will Fleury and Martin Boudet for the heavyweight championship, which, well, it's not gonna be that great probably because Martin is probably just gonna lay on Fleury. But who knows, maybe Martin has gotten nice and thick and juicy ever since he left the UFC and will have developed some nasty KO power. Fleury is definitely juicing though. As you can see here, he tested positive in the PFL, and maybe we'll see some of that sauced up heavyweight action in the end. The co-main event, though, is pretty damn solid, and I can say that for a fact, because it's going to be between Zhalgas Zhumagulov and David Dvorak. Now, I think this fight is actually really underrated, because although Zhalgas went 1-6 in the UFC, he's low-key pretty underrated and one of the unluckiest fighters in the history of the UFC. His last 3 losses in the UFC were all split decision losses, and 2 of those were to Charles Johnson and Joshua Van, and we all know how good those 2 fighters are. And what's crazy is, in their fight, Zhalgas was throwing more strikes than Joshua Van. Yes, he was less accurate, but he was keeping up with Van, who is one of the highest volume strikers in UFC history. Besides that, Zhalgas has wins over Tagir Ulanbekov and Ali Bagutinov in the promotion Fight Nights Global. And people forget, man, Bagutinov used to be a top-ranked UFC flyweight back in the day who fought Demetrius Johnson for the belt. People forget. And David Dvorak went 3-3 in the UFC, but his losses were mostly to good competition like Manel Kape, Steve Verseg, and a non-washed Mateus Nicolau. And he also has a win over Bruno Silva. So this fight between Zhalgas Zhumagulov and David Dvorak is honestly gonna be like a slightly worse version of an Apex flyweight main event. Kinda like the one we just had this weekend between Kape and Royval. And look, the fight itself is not gonna be as good as the UFC. But hey, it's going to be in front of a big crowd, which is better than the Apex, right? But yeah, just to end off this video, with the UFC removing promotions from Fight Pass, the PFL blowing all their money on Ngannou, who, let's be honest, kinda scammed them, and one championship becoming a regional Muay Thai and kickboxing league. The real key to keeping options alive for fighters is to support these large regional promotions like RIZIN, OKTAGON, and KSW that already have big local fan bases and sustainable sources of revenue. That's the key to all of this, and to keep the UFC and Dana Baldy from enshittifying MMA even more.